1,600 years ago, one of the greatest civilizations in the history of humanity collapsed. Its downfall would have an effect on our entire species that continues to this very day. In fact, some scholars say that we are still living through the consequences of its collapse. But before we get into the video, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. Also, stick around until the end where I'll be sharing one fact about the Roman Empire that you won't learn anywhere else. Now, the Roman Empire reached its greatest extent during the 2nd century AD. Under the rule of Emperor Hadrian, at this time it controlled much of Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. The empire covered an area of about 5 million kilometers squared, roughly equivalent to the modern-day United Kingdom and Spain combined. Within its borders lived about 60 million subjects of many different cultures and races who spoke many different languages. Despite these differences, they were united under Roman rule. In fact, most of the people living in the Roman Empire weren't even Roman. Only about 7 million of them actually lived in Italy. Another 11 million lived in the provinces of Africa, and about 15 million in the eastern provinces. Of these people, only a tiny fraction, about 1% of the total population, were slaves. Rome's economy was based mainly on agriculture, which provided food for the vast majority of its citizens. Slavery was widespread throughout the empire, and slaves were used for labor-intensive tasks, such as farming, mining, and construction. Trade was another important aspect of the Roman economy, and merchants traveled throughout the empire and beyond its borders to buy and sell goods. Thanks to a well-developed system of roads, messengers could travel from one end of the empire to the other in relative comfort. This system also facilitated the movement of troops, which helped to maintain stability and order throughout the empire. Most of the trade was done by sea, and Rome had one of the largest navies in the ancient world. The Mediterranean Sea was largely under Roman control, allowing for the safe transport of goods between distant provinces. However, land-based trade was also common, and merchants often traveled in caravans for protection. Major cities throughout the empire served as centers of commerce, and many of them were connected by well-paved roads that allowed for the quick and efficient movement of goods. The Roman army was widely feared throughout the ancient world. During its peak, it boasted an impressive force of over 300,000 soldiers. This vast army played a crucial role in defending the empire's vast borders, putting down rebellions, and expanding Roman territory. Although mercenaries made up a significant portion of the fighting force, there was also a large standing army of Roman citizens who were required to serve in the military for a certain period of time. These soldiers were well trained and equipped, and the Roman army was known for its discipline and effectiveness. During the 2nd century, the Emperor Antiochus kept the peace within the empire, and his reign marked a period of stability and prosperity. After him, however, things started to take a turn for the worse. Marcus Aurelius, who came to power in 161 AD, faced various challenges, including wars along the empire's frontiers, natural disasters, and economic difficulties. His reign saw the beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire. As the empire grew wealthier, more people in Rome enjoyed a higher standard of living. But while the elite grew richer, the poor grew poorer. By the 3rd century, the gap between the rich and the poor was so great that emperors were elected on the basis of their promises to lower taxes and relieve the common people of their burdens. So what caused the mighty Roman Empire to crumble? Well, in truth, it was a combination of factors that led to its eventual demise. But don't worry, because we're going to cover them all in this video. First, let's look at the internal pressures that were weakening the Roman Empire from within. One of the biggest problems Rome faced was corruption. As the empire grew larger and more powerful, so did the greed of its leaders. Many of them became obsessed with acquiring as much wealth as possible, regardless of how they obtained it. This corruption spread throughout government and society, creating a culture of bribery, extortion, and embezzlement. As a result, the tax burden on ordinary citizens increased, while the quality of public services declined. Another problem was the cost of maintaining the military. The Roman army was once the pride of the empire, but as it grew larger and more expensive to support, it became a burden on the economy. Soldiers began to demand higher pay and better treatment, but the government was unable to meet these demands. This created tension within the ranks and led to a decline in morale. Eventually, the soldiers became so disillusioned that they began to mutiny and even engage in battles against each other. And when the Germanic general, the father of Alaric, crossed the Rhine River with his army in 358, Emperor Constantius II paid him to leave. This set a bad precedent, and soon every barbarian leader was asking for money to go away. And then there were the Goths. They had been living peacefully on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire for decades, but in the mid-300s, they began migrating westwards into Roman territory. The Goths were a fierce and warlike people, and they quickly began to cause problems for the Romans. As the Goths grew in number and strength, they began to raid Roman cities and provinces, stealing their possessions and killing their people. This created a climate of fear and insecurity throughout the empire, and the people were desperate for someone to protect them. To make matters worse, Rome had become overextended. The empire was simply too large to effectively govern and defend. As a result, the provinces were becoming increasingly autonomous, and the central government was losing control. To try to fix this problem, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into 4 parts in an attempt to make it easier to administer. But this only exacerbated the issue, and the provinces soon broke into civil war. Next, let's examine the external pressures that were bearing down on the empire from without. During the 3rd century, a series of plagues swept through the Roman Empire, killing millions of people. These epidemics devastated the population and left a lasting impact on the economy and society. The first outbreak occurred in 165 AD during the reign of Antoninus Pius and lasted for 5 years. It is believed that the disease originated in India and spread along trade routes, causing widespread death and panic as it spread throughout the empire. The Antonine Plague primarily affected the Roman provinces, particularly those in the east where the majority of trade with India occurred. Historians estimate that the plague claimed between 5 and 10% of the empire's population. But then, in 250 AD, a second and even more deadly outbreak struck the empire, known as the Plague of Cities. This pandemic had a devastating impact on the Roman population, with estimates suggesting it killed between 25 and 50% of those infected. The plague not only caused immense suffering and loss of life, but also had profound consequences for Roman society and economy. When you combine all these factors together, it's easy to see why the Roman Empire began to collapse. There was corruption, inflation, civil war, barbarian invasions, disease, a declining population, and overexpansion. But the final blow came in 410, when the Visigoth king, Alaric, sacked the city of Rome. The sack of Rome was a shocking event that sent ripples throughout the ancient world. It demonstrated the vulnerability of the once invincible Roman Empire and served as a warning to other nations of the consequences of unchecked aggression. The impact of the sack of Rome was felt not only by the Romans, but also by the Goths and the rest of the ancient world. The event highlighted the brutality of war and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, serving as a reminder of the need for restraint and diplomacy in international relations. In 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was forced to abdicate the throne after a Germanic warrior named Odoacer seized power in Italy. With this, the Western Roman Empire came to an end. But the Eastern Roman Empire continued to survive for another 1,000 years. Today, the legacy of the Roman Empire lives on in the ruins of its once great cities and monuments. But despite its fall, the ideas and innovations of the Romans continue to influence our world today. From their advancements in law and government to their contributions to architecture and engineering, the Romans left behind a lasting impact on human civilization. So what can we learn from the fall of the Roman Empire? Well, first and foremost, we see that no empire lasts forever. No matter how powerful and influential a nation may be, it is ultimately subject to the laws of history. Secondly, the story of Rome reminds us of the importance of economic stability and responsible governance. When an empire becomes too big to handle, it loses control of its borders and is vulnerable to attack. Thirdly, we must also remember that the decisions made by leaders have a profound impact on their nation and its people. When leaders become corrupt and self-serving, it can lead to the decline of even the mightiest empire. Ultimately, the fall of the Roman Empire is a cautionary tale, but also an inspiration. It is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of responsible leadership. But it also shows us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit can endure. Alright, now for that special fact I mentioned earlier. Did you know that the last official Civil War widow, Helen Viola, died in 2020? She was the wife of Lincoln's close friend and fellow lawyer, John Hay. who served as Lincoln's personal secretary during the Civil War. Now check out another video here.